Have you ever had a moment where just a few words cut deeper than anything else? Words that stick, echoing long after the call ends? That's what happened to me one Tuesday evening, sitting at my kitchen table in San Francisco with a half-finished cup of coffee gone cold. The phone rang. I didn't think much of it. My parents called often, usually to check in, sometimes to remind me about birthdays or to update me on neighbors I hadn't seen in years. But this time felt different. My father's voice carried a sharpness that made my stomach clench before he even said the words. He asked for more money, not politely, not even with gratitude for the years I'd already given. Just a demand, heavy, unapologetic. I reminded him I'd been sending hundreds every month since his surgery. I told him I was still covering part of the hospital bills and the medication. I said it as gently as I could, because that's what I'd always done. Carry the weight quietly. But then came the sneer. You'll never be as good as your brother. Silence. I remember staring at the cracked tile near my sink, listening to the hum of my refrigerator. I didn't know what to say, because there it was, the sentence that had haunted my life, spoken out loud again, sharp and cold. Lucas, the golden child. The successful lawyer with the waterfront condo, the country club membership, the kind of life that photographs well on social media. I knew the comparison would come, but hearing it in that moment, after everything I'd sacrificed, it was like a punch straight to the chest. I wanted to ask, what about the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish freelance projects just to cover your bills? What about the vacations I never took, the dinners I skipped, the friends I lost touch with because every dollar mattered? But the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I already knew the answer. Nothing I did was enough. I hung up after promising nothing. My father's voice lingered, the insult heavier than the request. I sat there in silence, the city's sounds muffled through my apartment windows, sirens in the distance, a neighbor's dog barking, the faint rattle of the Muni line 2 blocks away. Ordinary sounds, but in that moment they felt like a backdrop to the unraveling of something I had carried too long. That phone call wasn't just a request for money, it was a declaration, a reminder of the role they had cast me in since childhood. The daughter who would never measure up, the one expected to give without recognition, the one who existed in the shadow of perfection they saw in Lucas. I could still hear my father's tone, that cruel mix of disappointment and certainty, and I knew right then something had cracked. The script I'd been following my whole life. Be the responsible one, the giving one, the invisible one. It couldn't hold any longer. I pushed the cold coffee aside, rested my head in my hands, and whispered to the empty room, maybe this is the last time. Because when someone tells you you'll never be enough, sometimes the only way to answer is to stop playing the part they wrote for you. Do you remember what it felt like to be the other child? The one who never quite measured up, no matter what you did? That was me. My childhood in San Francisco looked perfect from the outside. 2-story house with the white trim, weekend barbecues in the backyard, holiday trips up to Lake Tahoe. To neighbors, we were the picture of a happy family. But inside those walls, the air was heavy with comparison. Lucas, my older brother, was the son everything revolved around. Straight A's, debate team champion, the kid teachers adored. At family dinners, stories of his achievements filled the table while my own efforts barely registered. I still remember winning second place in an art contest in middle school. I came home, brimming with pride, holding my ribbon. My father nodded, set it aside, and turned to Lucas. Did you hear? Your brother made the honor roll again. Okay. Just like that, my moment vanished. Every milestone of mine became a footnote to his headline. When I learned to play piano, my mother praised Lucas for focusing on law prep. When I graduated high school, my parents whispered about how Lucas was already interning at a prestigious firm. I was the filler, the supporting character in his story of brilliance. And the thing about growing up in someone's shadow is you start to shrink yourself to fit it. I stopped talking about my dreams because what was the point? Lucas's dreams mattered more. I learned to smile at his victories, even when they came at the cost of my own voice. I trained myself to stay quiet when the comparisons stung, to bite my tongue when the words, "What about me?" wanted to slip out. By the time I left for college, I carried that silence like a second skin. My parents helped Lucas with tuition, his apartment, even his car. For me? You'll figure it out, Ivy. You've always been resourceful. I worked part-time at a bookstore, lived off instant noodles, and told myself independence was a badge of honor. But deep down, I knew it was favoritism disguised as tough love. Those early years taught me 2 lessons. 1, that love in my family came with conditions. 2, that if I wanted to be seen, I would have to fight for it on my own. Still, I clung to a quiet hope. Maybe one day, when I proved myself, when I built something real, they'd look at me and finally say, "We're proud of you." That hope carried me through sleepless nights and impossible schedules. But the shadow never left. It followed me into adulthood, into every phone call, every holiday visit, every moment when my parents' eyes lit up for Lucas, but dimmed for me. And that's why the words on that Tuesday call cut so deeply. They weren't new. They were just the loudest echo of a lifetime spent being told, without saying it outright, "You will never be enough." There's a certain sound a hospital hallway makes late at night. The squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the low hum of machines behind closed doors, the sterile air that seems to press against your skin. I remember all of it, because that's where I stood the night my father had his first heart attack. I rushed from work, still in my office clothes, my laptop bag heavy against my shoulder. Lucas was already there, crisp suit, phone glued to his ear as he paced outside the ICU. He didn't even look up when I walked in. My mother sat in a plastic chair, eyes red, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. And me? I just went into action mode. The doctor came out, spoke of surgery, recovery, costs. That last word echoed louder than the rest, costs. My mother's face crumpled. Lucas mumbled something about having an important case, about needing to check his calendar. And just like that, the responsibility shifted to me. I didn't even hesitate. I pulled out my checkbook that night, emptied what I had in savings, money I'd set aside for maybe a trip, maybe a down payment on a car. It all went to the hospital instead. I told myself it was what family did. You step up when someone needs you. But that first sacrifice became a pattern. After the surgery, the bills didn't stop. Medication, follow-up visits, rehab sessions, every month another envelope in the mail. I started sending money without being asked, just to keep the phone from ringing with more demands. At first it was manageable. Then it became routine. 600 here, 800 there. I picked up freelance projects after my 9-to-5. Website coding, app debugging, anything that paid. Nights blurred into mornings. I'd sit at my kitchen table, eyes burning from staring at a screen, chasing deadlines while the city slept. Coffee cups stacked beside me, takeout containers lined the counter. My friends stopped inviting me out because they knew I'd say no. And still, I told myself it was temporary, just until my father got better, just until things stabilized, except they never did. The requests kept coming, always dressed as needs, always urgent. And Lucas? He sent flowers to the hospital, posed for photos with my father, and earned applause for being the devoted son. Meanwhile, the receipts stacked up on my desk, my bank account drained, and nobody seemed to notice. I remember one night in particular. I was on my 3rd project of the week, clock showing 2:47 a.m. My chest ached from exhaustion, my head heavy with the thought of another deadline in the morning. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. We're proud of Lucas. He's such a success. Your father feels so lucky. No mention of the checks I'd mailed, the hours I'd lost, the quiet sacrifices I made. Just another reminder that my worth was invisible. I closed my laptop, laid my head down on the table, and wondered if they even realized. If they knew how much I was bleeding for them, if they cared. That was the first sacrifice. Not just the money, but the years I gave away piece by piece, hoping it would buy me recognition, hoping one day they'd see me, not as the daughter who would never measure up, but as the one who held everything together when no one else would. There's tired. And then there's the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, that makes even sunlight feel heavy. That's where I found myself after months of juggling 2 lives, my regular job by day and a second, secret life by night. One fueled by coffee, glowing screens, and the weight of bills with my name on them. I'd clock out at 6 p.m., grab a sandwich I could eat while walking, and head home to start round 2. The city around me kept moving, people laughing outside bars, couples walking their dogs, but I lived in a tunnel of deadlines and dollar signs. I told myself I was strong enough, that I could handle it. But the truth? I was unraveling. 70-hour weeks turned into the norm. My eyes burned from blue light. My wrists ached from typing. My head throbbed with migraines I ignored. Some mornings, I'd find myself sitting on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, realizing I'd fallen asleep mid-sentence on my keyboard. Other times, I'd wake to the sound of my neighbor's alarm clock through the wall, because I hadn't even gone to bed yet. And all the while, Lucas flaunted his new condo with a view of the Bay Bridge, weekend golf trips, Instagram posts from Napa, champagne glass in hand. My parents gushed over every photo. Did you see what your brother just bought? Lucas is doing so well for himself. Each comment cut deeper than the last, because none of them saw what I was giving up to keep their lives stable. I tried to remind myself why I was doing it, Dad's health, Mom's peace of mind, family loyalty. But slowly, those reasons felt less like love and more like chains. Because every time I thought maybe this month would be lighter, another request came. Your father needs new medication. The insurance didn't cover everything. And the worst one, we knew we could count on you. Duh. That sentence was supposed to be comforting. Instead, it crushed me, because it meant they never expected Lucas to step in. He was the golden boy. His success was his shield, and me, I was the safety net they never bothered to thank. The drain wasn't just financial, it was emotional. Friends stopped calling. I missed birthdays, skipped holidays, pulled away from anyone who might ask, "Are you okay?" Because the answer was no, and I couldn't bear to say it out loud. My world had narrowed to work, bills, and a gnawing resentment I tried to swallow. One night, after wiring another $700 I couldn't afford, I stood at my window overlooking the quiet street below. The city was alive with neon, laughter drifting from a bar down the block. But in my apartment, it was just me and the sound of my own breath. I pressed my forehead against the glass and asked myself, when does this end? The truth? It never would. Not unless I found a way to break the cycle. Because sacrifice had stopped being noble. It had become the slow erosion of everything I was. It arrived on a Friday, tucked neatly inside a thick cream-colored envelope. Heavy paper, embossed letters, gold trim. The kind of invitation you run your fingers over just to feel the texture. I knew before opening it what it was. Lucas's wedding. I sat at my kitchen table staring at it like it was some kind of verdict. Outside, the city buzzed with weekend life, cars honking, kids playing in the park down the street. But in that moment, it was just me and that envelope. My hands shook as I slid a finger under the seal. Inside, the words glared back. Black tie only. A glamorous venue, A guest list dripping with status, a celebration destined to be splashed across social media. I should have felt happy for him. That's what siblings do, right? But all I felt was the sting of irony. Here I was, living off instant noodles, calculating whether I could afford another month of rent, while my brother prepared to host a wedding that probably cost more than my yearly salary. And still, my parents would beam, chest out with pride, telling anyone who would listen how incredible their son was. I placed the invitation next to the latest stack of bills: electricity, internet, rent, hospital costs. My life, measured in overdue notices and payment reminders. I thought about the hours I'd lost, nights blurred into mornings, migraines that lasted for days, all so I could keep helping. And yet here was proof, printed in gold ink, that Lucas could throw money at luxury while never lifting a finger for the family. A memory surfaced then, the last holiday dinner. My mother showing relatives photos of Lucas's new Tahoe house while I quietly cleared the dishes. No one asked me about my work, my projects, my life. I was invisible. And now, holding that invitation, I realized just how deep the invisibility went. What they expected of me was clear. Show up in a dress I couldn't afford, smile through the speeches, clap for the man who never once carried the weight I did, pretend I wasn't drowning while he celebrated on dry land. I pushed the invitation aside and leaned back in my chair. My apartment was quiet, lit only by the glow of a lamp with a flickering bulb. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. Something inside me snapped, but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. I whispered to myself, if he's perfect, let him pay. The words hung in the air, steady and sharp. It was the first time I said it out loud, the thought that had been circling in my head for years. If Lucas was the golden child, the one they couldn't stop praising, then maybe it was time he proved it with more than Instagram photos and cocktail parties. The invitation sat there for hours, unopened again, its edges curling in the night air. And with every glance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a boundary forming. Because maybe the wedding wasn't just his celebration. Maybe it was my turning point. The invitation might have been the spark, but the fire came later, at the dinner table. Families have this way of turning a meal into a stage, and that night, mine gave me the perfect script to either play along or finally tear it apart. We gathered at my parents' house in the Sunset District. The table was set just like always, my mother's china, the silverware polished, a roast sitting in the center. It smelled like home, and yet the air carried that old familiar weight. The expectation that I'd nod, smile, and take whatever came. Lucas arrived late, of course. Perfect timing, perfect suit, perfect smile. He breezed in with stories from work about clients who just couldn't survive without him. My parents laughed, soaking it in like sunshine. I sat there, hands folded, feeling the shadow wrap around me once again. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. "Ivy," he said, not even looking directly at me, "we need to talk about increasing the amount you send. Medical costs are rising again." He sliced into his meat as if it were nothing more than a casual reminder. I froze. The clatter of forks, the hum of conversation, it all faded. It was just his words, sharp as a blade. I wanted to scream that I'd already given everything, that my body ached from the hours I worked, that my dreams had been shelved so they could keep pretending Lucas was untouchable. And then he added the line that pushed me over the edge. "You should be grateful we raised you to be so responsible. Your brother, well, he's got bigger things on his plate." The room spun. I looked at Lucas, sipping his wine without a care, his cufflinks catching the light. I saw my mother smiling faintly, as if this arrangement were perfectly natural. And then I spoke. My voice didn't shake the way I thought it would. It was clear, steady, the kind of tone you hear when someone has finally had enough. "If he's perfect," I said, "let him pay." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading, silence thickening. My father's fork clinked against his plate. My mother's eyes widened. Lucas froze mid-sip, the wineglass trembling slightly in his hand. For once, nobody had a quick response. No lecture, no dismissal. Just stunned silence. I felt my heartbeat hammering in my chest, but I didn't look away. I let the words hang there, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't just about the money. It was about decades of being invisible, of being told I'd never measure up. It was about claiming my place at that table, not as the lesser sibling, but as someone who had carried more than anyone realized. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low. "Watch your tone." But it was too late. The tone had been set. For the first time, I hadn't swallowed my resentment. I had put it on the table, right between the roast and the wine glasses. The meal ended in awkward silence. Plates half finished, conversation dead. Lucas left early, his jaw tight, his silence louder than words. My parents retreated to the kitchen, whispering. And me? I walked out into the cool night air, the fog rolling in from the ocean, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Because sometimes strength isn't in carrying more. Sometimes it's in finally putting the weight down. The silence from that dinner didn't stay at the table. It followed me home, pressed into the walls of my apartment like a shadow I couldn't shake. I half expected my phone to ring that night with an apology, or at least some explanation. Instead, there was nothing. Just the steady hum of the city outside and the buzzing in my own head. The next morning, though, the messages began. First from my mother. "Ivy, you embarrassed us. You don't talk to your father like that." Then another. "Lucas was humiliated. He brings so much pride to this family." No mention of the years I'd spent covering bills, no recognition of what had pushed me to finally speak up. Just blame, stacked on blame. By the third day, my father called. His voice was clipped, colder than usual. "You need to think about the damage you're causing. Families support each other. You're acting selfish." Selfish? That word hit harder than I expected. After years of giving until I had nothing left, now I was selfish for saying no. Lucas, of course, stayed silent. No calls, no texts. His silence wasn't empty, though. It was loaded. A calculated kind of silence, the kind that let my parents carry the weight of shaming me so he didn't have to. At work, I found myself distracted, rereading the texts, feeling the sting of every word. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if maybe I should have just swallowed my pride one more time. That's the thing about boundaries. They don't just upset other people. They make you question yourself too. But then, late one evening, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, shoulders slumped, a person worn thin. And I realized, this was the result of never saying no. If speaking up meant being labeled selfish, maybe selfish was exactly what I needed to be. The fallout wasn't easy. Family group chats went quiet when I joined. Calls became colder, shorter. Holidays loomed ahead like battles I didn't want to fight. But there was also a strange kind of peace in the distance. For the first time, I wasn't automatically the one stepping in, the one smoothing things over. Ivy, the dependable daughter, the invisible helper, she'd been left behind at that dinner table. The person walking away was someone new, someone who had finally said enough. The invitation had sat unopened on my counter for weeks, its edges curling from the damp fog that drifted through my San Francisco apartment. I thought ignoring it would make it go away. But weddings like Lucas's don't just fade. They explode. I didn't go. Of course I didn't. I couldn't stomach the idea of smiling in a borrowed dress while he paraded down an aisle paved with money he'd never sacrificed for anyone else. My parents called me cruel. "It's your brother's big day," my mother pleaded, but my no held firm. And when the day finally came, I stayed home, curtains drawn, the city outside humming along without me. 2 nights later, the news broke. A headline scrolled across my phone as I sat hunched over my laptop. "Prominent lawyer's wedding canceled amid financial scandal." My breath caught. It was Lucas. His fiancée had called off the wedding at the last possible moment, guests already seated, champagne already chilled. The reason? She'd uncovered discrepancies in his finances, accounts that didn't add up, investments he hadn't disclosed, the kind of secrets that make trust impossible. The fallout was immediate. Photos of guests leaving the venue hit social media within hours. Clips of half-empty tables, a cake left untouched, even a video of Lucas storming out, face twisted with fury. The comment section lit up like wildfire. Strangers speculated about hidden debts, about lies, about arrogance finally catching up to him. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, my phone buzzed with a different kind of message. My mother again. "This is your fault. If you hadn't embarrassed him, he wouldn't be under so much pressure." My fault. As if my decision not to attend had somehow toppled the house of cards Lucas had built. I stared at the words, my hands trembling, the glow of the screen blurring in my vision. Anger welled up, sharp and hot. For years I had been the invisible one, the dependable one, the one who gave until I had nothing left. And now, even as Lucas's own lies unraveled, they still pointed the finger at me. But there was another feeling too, something unexpected. Relief. Relief that for once the spotlight wasn't on me to fix things. The cracks were showing, and this time they weren't mine. The city outside felt louder that night, sirens cutting through the air, voices spilling from open bar doors, the constant hum of traffic over the Bay Bridge. I sat by my window and let it wash over me, a reminder that the world kept spinning, no matter how dramatic the collapse of one man's perfect image might be. Because for the first time, Lucas's perfection wasn't untouchable. And though my parents couldn't see it, I knew. The story was shifting. When the headlines spread, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see the truth. That Lucas wasn't untouchable, that their golden son had cracks in his perfect armor, but I should have known better. The first call came the morning after the wedding disaster. My father's voice was sharp, like every word was meant to cut. "Do you realize what you've done?" he snapped. "Your brother's life is in ruins, and you, sitting there smug, refusing to stand by him, this is on you." I tried to speak, to remind him that I hadn't lied, hadn't hidden money, hadn't built a life on secrets. But he didn't want explanations. He wanted a scapegoat. And in our family, that role always belonged to me. Then came my mother, her tone softer but no less poisonous. "If you had just come to the wedding, Ivy, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled. People saw you weren't there. They talked. It made Lucas look weak." I pressed the phone against my ear, stunned. My absence, my refusal to play along, was now the reason for their shame, not Lucas's choices. Not the lies he'd spun. Me, always me. The texts followed. Words repeated like drumbeats, selfish, ungrateful, jealous. Each one felt heavier, not because I believed them, but because I'd heard them all before. For years, those words had kept me in line, had convinced me to keep giving, keep bending. But this time, something was different. This time, the blame slid off, landing at their feet where it belonged. At work, I kept my phone face down on my desk, trying to ignore the vibration after vibration. My coworkers whispered about the wedding scandal. Everyone in San Francisco seemed to be talking about it. Some glanced at me with questions in their eyes, but I stayed quiet. Let them wonder. Let them piece it together. That night, alone in my apartment, I reread every message. My parents' disappointment, their anger, their refusal to see reality. And yet, instead of folding under it, I felt something harden inside me. A resolve. Because maybe this was the truth. No matter what I did, they'd always find a way to blame me. And if blame was inevitable, then I might as well live life on my terms. The scandal was already the talk of the city when Lucas finally decided to confront me. I should have expected it. After all, silence was never his strong suit when his pride was at stake. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a project at the office. My desk was cluttered with sticky notes, half-drunk coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of a deadline nearly met. That's when I heard the click of expensive shoes against the polished floor, growing louder, sharper, closer. I looked up, and there he was, Lucas. Perfectly tailored suit, jaw clenched, eyes blazing. He didn't even pause at the receptionist's desk. He walked straight to me like a storm with a single target. "Ivy," he said, his voice carrying across the room, heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. My coworkers, who had whispered about him for days, now had front-row seats. I stood, trying to keep my voice even. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out my chair with a sharp scrape and leaned over my desk. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Sitting here, watching me fall. "You've been waiting for this moment." My cheeks burned. Not from shame, but from the weight of every eye in the office on us. "Lucas, this isn't the place." He cut me off, voice rising. "You've always been jealous. Always bitter because you could never measure up. And now you're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me lose everything." The room was silent except for his voice. I could see coworkers exchanging glances, phones slipping into hands, recording. My heart pounded, but I kept my tone steady. "This isn't about me, Lucas." "These are your choices, your lies." His laugh was harsh, echoing. "Lies? The only lie is you pretending you've ever mattered. You're nothing compared to me, nothing." The words hit hard, but not in the way he intended. They didn't shatter me. They revealed him, desperate, unraveling, clinging to an illusion that had already crumbled. I glanced around the office. I could feel the shift. My coworkers weren't seeing me as the jealous sister he painted. They were seeing him, red-faced, venomous, unraveling in public. For years, I had carried the weight of being the invisible one, the dependable one, the quiet shadow. But at that moment, standing in front of Lucas and a room full of witnesses, I realized something. His power had always depended on my silence, and I wasn't silent anymore. I took a breath, steady and clear. "Lucas, you need to leave." The words hung there, calm and final. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. And for the first time in my life, I watched my brother flinch. He turned, muttering under his breath, storming out with the same loud footsteps he'd arrived with. The door slammed behind him, leaving the office buzzing with whispers and the quiet glow of screens that had captured every second. And I knew this wasn't over. But neither was I. You know how sometimes life shifts in a single instant? One moment you're just surviving another confrontation, and the next, you realize the whole world is watching. That's what happened the day Lucas stormed into my office. At first, I thought it ended when he slammed the door behind him. The tension hung heavy, coworkers whispering, keyboards clicking nervously as if typing could erase what they'd just witnessed. I sat back down, trying to steady my breath, telling myself it was over, but it wasn't. Not even close. Later that evening, as I sank into my couch with reheated leftovers, my phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a link. My hands trembled as I tapped it open, and there it was. Lucas standing over my desk, face red with fury, his words echoing through the office. "You're nothing compared to me, nothing." Captured in perfect clarity, every cruel syllable, every sneer. I froze, hearing the venom all over again, but this time it wasn't just me reliving it, it was everyone. The video was already viral. Thousands of views climbing by the second, comments stacking underneath. People I'd never met dissecting every word, every glance, every silence. Some calling him arrogant, others calling him abusive. And me, the sister he claimed was invisible, suddenly very, very visible. I scrolled, heart racing. How could parents treat their kids so differently? She's clearly the one holding that family together. Imagine humiliating your sister at her workplace. Disgusting. For years, my story had lived in shadows, whispered behind closed doors, buried under comparison. Now it was out there, in the light, and people weren't siding with him. They were siding with me. But the power of the video wasn't just in the comments. It was in the silence that followed from my parents. Hours turned to days, and not a single call came. No blame, no excuses, just silence, heavy and uncharacteristic. I knew they'd seen it. Everyone had. The image of Lucas, the perfect son, had cracked wide open, and the whole world was watching the pieces fall. At first, I was terrified. My private humiliation had become public spectacle. Strangers now knew the words that had been used to define me all my life. But then something shifted. Because in their eyes, those words weren't true. They saw what I'd endured. They saw what I had given. They saw me. And in that moment, I realized silence had never protected me. It had only protected him. But now, with one unplanned live stream, silence was shattered. I closed my phone, sat in the quiet hum of my apartment, and let myself breathe. Not out of relief, this wasn't over, but with a new kind of strength. Because for the first time, I wasn't carrying this story alone. The world had seen it, the truth was out, and there was no going back. When you spend your whole life feeling invisible, the shock of suddenly being seen is overwhelming. That's what the live stream did. It cracked open a door I thought would always stay shut. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages. "Ivy, I saw the video." "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through." Mawait, co-workers who had only ever shared polite small talk, came to my desk with quiet nods of support. Even my neighbor, the one who barely smiled in the elevator, slipped a note under my door. "Stay strong. You deserve better." Social media was even louder. Thousands of strangers dissected every frame of Lucas's outburst. Some rewound it again and again, pointing out the way my hands stayed steady on the desk while his trembled with rage. Others noticed my calm reply, my refusal to match his volume. "She's the strong one comment read. Another, "Imagine humiliating your sister like that. He just exposed himself." For once, the narrative wasn't written by my family. It wasn't shaped by my parents' praise for Lucas or their endless criticism of me. It was written by people who had nothing to gain, nothing to protect. And they saw the truth. But the reactions weren't just supportive, they were validating. Strangers said what I had longed to hear my whole life. "She's the one carrying everything. She deserves recognition. She's enough." 3 simple words I had waited decades for. Enough. At work, the shift was palpable. I was no longer the quiet background presence. People looked me in the eye differently, with respect, even admiration. The same colleagues who had once whispered now stood taller beside me, as if they too had been waiting for someone to call out injustice when they saw it. Still, there was fear beneath the validation. What would my parents do now? Would Lucas retaliate? Would the silence from my family break with more accusations? I carried those questions with me, heavy and unanswered, but the louder truth drowned them out. I wasn't alone anymore. The world had reacted, and for once, it was on my side. The silence from my parents stretched longer than I expected. For a family that never hesitated to call me out, to lecture, to blame, their quiet was almost eerie. But silence has a way of speaking, and this time it screamed louder than their words ever had. It broke one Sunday afternoon when my mother finally called. Her voice was low, trembling, not with anger, but with something that sounded dangerously close to shame. "Ivy," she whispered, "people have been talking. Neighbors, relatives. They've all seen the video. For years, our family's dynamic had been hidden inside the walls of our home. To outsiders, we looked polished. Lucas, the golden boy, my parents, the proud guardians, me, the dutiful daughter in the background. But now, those walls had crumbled. The world had seen the truth, and there was no patching it back together. My father came on the line next, his tone harsher, though not as steady as usual. "You didn't have to humiliate us like this." "Everything you've done could have stayed private?" I almost laughed. Humiliate them? For decades, I had been humiliated in silence, diminished by comparison, erased by favoritism. The live stream didn't humiliate them. It revealed them. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects spread. Family friends who once gushed about Lucas avoided bringing up his name. At church, people glanced at me differently, whispering not with pity, but with recognition. Some even came up quietly. "We never realized how much you were doing for your parents." And that's when the truth began to surface in a way my parents couldn't stop. Receipts, bank transfers, records of years of payments made by me and never mentioned aloud. Conversations with relatives where my mother had bragged about Lucas's success while conveniently skipping over the fact that I was the one covering medical bills. Piece by piece, the story rewrote itself, and every fragment pointed to the same conclusion. Lucas wasn't the savior, I was. It stung, of course, that it took strangers and social proof for the truth to matter, that my parents only faced it when the outside world forced them to. But there was also a strange satisfaction in knowing that the burden I carried in silence had finally been dragged into the light. Lucas stayed quiet through it all. No public statement, no apology, just a disappearing act. But absence spoke too. His silence was its own admission, a gap that only widened as people connected the dots. And me? I walked through those weeks with my head a little higher, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally felt seen. For years, I had been told, "You'll never be as good as your brother." Now the truth was undeniable. I had been better all along. Not because of glory or glamour, but because of grit. The family I grew up in, the image of unity and pride, was exposed. And for once, that exposure didn't destroy me, it freed me. There's a strange quiet that comes after the storm. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that lets you finally hear yourself. That's the quiet I stepped into after weeks of chaos, after the video, after the whispers and the accusations and the long overdue truths. For the first time, the noise wasn't about what my family wanted or what Lucas achieved. It was about me and what I would choose next. I sat by the window of my apartment one night, city lights flickering like restless stars against the fog. For years, I had looked out at that skyline and felt small, swallowed up by the weight of everything I owed, everything expected of me. But now, the same view felt different. It wasn't a cage, it was a horizon. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who mailed checks without hesitation, who skipped meals so her father's prescriptions would be covered, who stayed silent while Lucas collected applause. I grieved for her because she deserved more than invisibility. But I also thanked her because without her resilience, I wouldn't have made it here. For once, I asked myself a question I had never dared before. What do you want, Ivy? Not what my parents needed. Not what Lucas expected. Not what the family image demanded, me. The answer was simple, though not easy. I wanted peace. I wanted freedom. I wanted to live without apologizing for taking up space. And most of all, I wanted to stop measuring my worth against a brother who had never carried even half the weight I had. So I began to make small choices. I stopped answering calls that drained me. I redirected the money I once sent home into a savings account with my own name on it. I took weekends off, real weekends, with long walks by the bay and dinners that didn't involve eating over my laptop. Each step felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like learning how to breathe again. Of course, the guilt lingered. Years of conditioning don't vanish overnight. Some mornings, I still woke up with the urge to check my bank balance, to calculate what I could spare. But then I'd remember. Sacrifice had become a habit, not a necessity. And habits can be broken. Choosing myself didn't mean erasing my family. It meant rewriting the terms. It meant saying, I matter too. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I believed it. I've told you my story, the shadows, the sacrifices, the breaking point, the fallout, and finally, the freedom. But I don't want this to just be about me. Stories like mine have a way of echoing into other lives, maybe into yours. So let me ask you, have you ever been told you're not enough? Maybe not in those exact words, but in 1,000 smaller ways. A sigh when you don't meet someone's expectation. A laugh when you dare to dream bigger than your place. A comparison slipped casually into conversation. Why can't you be more like them? Words that sting, not because they're loud, but because they whisper in your head long after. I lived most of my life inside that whisper, always reaching, always giving, always hoping that if I bent a little further, carried a little more, maybe then I'd be seen. Maybe then I'd be loved. But the truth is, love that depends on you breaking yourself isn't love at all. It's control. And when I finally broke free, I realized something. The hardest part wasn't standing up to my family. It was standing up to myself, to the version of me that believed my worth depended on them. That voice still tries to creep in sometimes, still tells me I'm selfish for saying no, still wonders if I've made a mistake. But each time I remind myself, choosing myself isn't betrayal, it's survival. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've given until there was nothing left. Maybe you've swallowed your words because you didn't want to upset someone you love. Maybe you've been the dependable one, the invisible one, the one who fixes everything but never gets credit. And maybe, deep down, you've asked yourself, when will it be my turn? I don't have all the answers, but here's what I've learned. Your turn comes when you decide it does. It comes the moment you stop waiting for recognition that may never arrive and instead give it to yourself. It comes when you draw a line and say, this is mine, my time, my money, my peace, and I will not give it away just to be told I still don't measure up. That moment won't be easy. You might lose people. You might be called selfish, ungrateful, cold. You might sit in silence and wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. But on the other side of that silence is something powerful. Yourself, whole and unbroken. I've walked through that fire. I've seen how painful it is to set boundaries with the people who raised you, the people you thought would always be in your corner. But I've also seen what happens when you don't. You disappear. Piece by piece, year by year, until there's nothing left of you except what they demanded. So I ask you again, what about you? What story are you living? Is it the one you chose, or the one someone else wrote for you? Are you carrying weight that doesn't belong to you? Are you giving away pieces of yourself just to hold on to a version of love that hurts more than it heals? If you feel that question pressing against your chest, then maybe this is your turning point. Maybe my story isn't just mine. It's the mirror you needed. Because here's the truth no one told me, the truth I had to learn the hard way. You are already enough. Not when you give more, not when you sacrifice more, not when you prove yourself over and over again. You are enough now as you are, even if no one in your family ever says it out loud. And when you believe that, when you live it, the world begins to change. People see you differently. You see yourself differently. The shadows lift, the weight shifts, the horizon opens. So let me leave you with this. Don't wait for permission to choose yourself. Don't wait for applause that may never come. Don't let someone else's definition of worth shrink your life into something small and silent. Choose yourself. Loudly, quietly, painfully, joyfully. Whatever it takes. Choose yourself again and again until it feels natural, until it feels like breathing. Because at the end of the day, the only story that truly matters isn't the one your parents told, or your siblings' achievements, or society's expectations. It's the story you write for yourself. And I believe, with everything in me, that your story deserves to be seen. So I'll ask one last time, what about you? Will you keep carrying a weight that was never yours, or will you finally set it down? The choice is yours. It always has been.